You too.
And that you stay that way once it starts. Oh. Hey, y'all. Hello, hello. Welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Uplate, a true crime podcast. I am joined tonight by my husband, Brian Sanders.
Gracious.
That's right. So we took a little hiatus. We've been off the past couple of weeks, and it was well needed and enjoyable.
Yes.
We'll get all to all that stuff at the end of the show.
Yeah.
But welcome back, guys. We're glad to see you in the chats. For those of you who are new here, this is a true crime podcast, but it's also a live YouTube show. So usually we air every Tuesday night on the Andrea Uplate YouTube channel, and then it'll drop to streaming platforms wherever you listen to your podcast after that. So keep that in mind if you are listening, that sometimes listener discretion could be advised. Tonight we've got a doozy of a case out of Asheboro, North Carolina that took place back in 2019. Many of you know we do a lot of either unsolved or lately I think I've been saying unresolved, because there are things that might be ruled one, some cases, that involve deaths that are ruled one way or determined to be to have happened a certain way, maybe by the medical examiner, and then the way the detectives do or don't file the case. So this one is technically a closed case that was a death of natural causes. All right, so we are going to talk all about that. We're going to show you some pictures, and everybody's saying they hope you don't get true crime. Hey, Fox.
Well, yeah, me too.
So anyway, so occasionally you will hear us listen or engage in the chats, because we have people in the chats that engage during the show and can ask questions or chat with us or whatever. You can do the same. It's free. You just log into YouTube and you can always hop in the chats. We always appreciate that and enjoy talking to everybody. So do you have anything before we talk? We didn't do a 2019 pop culture, did we?
No, I mean, it was only a couple years ago.
Yeah, not much.
One of those things. 2019, I don't know, probably movies and songs. I mean, not enough.
Yeah, I got nothing. I'll tell you right now.
I think if we go like 10 years back is good, but 2019 was, the only thing would be like that was pre-COVID.
Okay.
So, probably the height of like concerts and live music maybe, but after COVID, everything kind of changed on that. But no, I didn't see anything that stood out.
Okay, Lil Nas X's. So the most played song, for those of you that may be new, we tend to try to cover pop culture, large crimes, all kinds of things that happened in the year that the case we are currently talking about took place. This case was in 2019, so that's what we're kind of being silly about now. But so the most played song of 2019 was Lil Nas X's Old Town Road.
Exactly. And that's exactly why I didn't care about doing pop culture.
Yeah, I don't know, and a lot of this is pop songs. Okay, the last thing I'll do is, I don't think there's been a good movie out in years, but
Joker was, I think, the big hit that year.
Oh, in 2019?
And something like, it brought in like $1 billion, if that's real.
Oh, Avengers Endgame was 2019.
Oh, well, there you go.
Frozen 2, Toy Story 4, Rambo 47. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
All right, well, let's dive in because we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
A whole lot. So you guys buckle up and get your notes out. Start taking notes and hit us up with some questions. All right, we're going to be talking about the death of Brandon EMBRY. Brandon EMBRY was 33 years old when he died. And again, I said that was in Asheboro, North Carolina. So Brandon EMBRY was born on September 7th of 1986. He lived with his mom, Sarah. We will be referencing Sarah quite often during the show. Stepfather, his brother, and his sister. So his mom was a Navy vet. Because of this, the family moved around quite frequently when Brandon was younger. I think they went to a lot of places where she said they would hike or explore. They were outdoors a lot. And so in early 2005, Brandon enlisted in the Navy himself. His mom was his mom was very excited about that, and it came as a bit of a surprise to her that he had done so. So in high school and middle school growing up, Brandon was a pretty big guy. So we're going to show you some pictures of him in a moment. He played football all through middle school and high school. And he was very interested in powerlifting once he got to high school. So I'll go on and show you guys a couple pictures while we're talking so you kind of have an idea of who we are talking about here. So this is when Brandon first joined in the Navy, about 18, 19 years old. That's him as a young guy. Let's see. I think we have some more. If you're new here, we'll put these pictures up on Instagram. Well, that may be all of the before pictures I have of him up there. But so he was a self-described introvert. So evidently he was very, very smart, very bright, well-liked, but kind of a quiet guy, kind of kept to himself. So when Brandon enlisted in the Navy, he was stationed out of Hawaii as a nuclear submarine machinist. He went on to do a few things in the Navy there, but about 6 years later, he was honorably discharged with a diagnosis of a pretty severe, at the time, back injury and also a diagnosis of PTSD. At this time, Brandon decided to go live near his family, and they were at this point in Seattle, Washington. So he goes to Seattle to hang out with his mom and everybody, and eventually, though, they move. So they move across the country to North Carolina. But in the meantime, he stays in Washington State and enrolled in the University of Washington as a chemical engineering student. So again, bright guy. But time kind of went on, and evidently Brandon couldn't keep up financially. The financial climate in Seattle, at that time even was tough to bear. And so he also was missing his family. He was pretty bummed when they moved to North Carolina. So he made the decision to relocate yet again and be near his family yet again in Asheboro, North Carolina this time. Excuse me. So here Brandon got an apartment at 711 South Church Street. And he initially got a job in robotics. It's kind of a general term. That's what most accountants say, just a robotics type job. So now things are about to start getting super weird. In February of 2019, Brandon was at work and he started feeling ill. He didn't know what was going on with him. He had not been sick prior. Brandon's boss told him to leave, go get drug tested. So I don't know what kind of employees were at this place or why that was the first pass, but that's what the boss wants him to do. He says to go get drug tested. So by all accounts, Brandon was actually unbothered by this. He easily agreed to do so, but he did stop on the way at a McDonald's parking lot. So accounts differ as to whether or not he was getting something to eat. I doubt it based on what you're about to hear next. It sounds like he was using that as a means to literally just park his vehicle, like he was not feeling well. So he stops his truck at a McDonald's parking lot, and his condition quickly deteriorated. So people in the parking lot saw what was happening because he was yelling. He started vomiting. He was a bit incoherent. So one of the passerbys there in the parking lot was concerned by what they were seeing in Brandon and called 911. The first responders say that Brandon's behavior was bizarre. They will later say that they considered this to be a drug overdose, that's what this looked like to them. So this is kind of still consistent with what his boss was saying. EMS people are saying the same thing. He couldn't seem to operate the door handle, they said, to his truck. He couldn't seem to focus. And things only got worse from here. So once Brandon got to the hospital, he lost consciousness and he was sedated and intubated. So he was put on a ventilator, a breathing machine, okay? So he was in full respiratory distress at this point and put in a medically induced coma. So sometimes they'll do that in the hospital to let your body rest. So they'll sedate you heavily, keep you on that ventilator, and keep you your entire body completely sedated. And they can do little tests and things like that to kind of see how far under you are. But they do that so your brain and the rest of your organs can work to the best of their ability and just rest. So over the next few days, his kidneys decreased in function to the point that they were failing. And he was placed on dialysis. This all happened in 2 to 3 days. Placed on dialysis. He spent almost a week in the hospital. During this time, multiple blood tests were completed, and we do have toxicology reports, and you can be assured that drug testing was done because, again, remember the EMTs were saying that this was kind of a presumed drug overdose based on his behavior and what they have experienced prior with other people. So all these drug tests were done, or all these blood tests, were done. There were no illegal substances found in his system. Nothing at all that gave them a reason for his illness. He had never had anything like this happen before. It came on suddenly, and he actually recovered based on how bad it went. He recovered fairly quickly, okay? So he actually never has any memory of this event later. So if you were to ask him about it, he was completely out, fully out of it. So 2 months later, in April of 2019, Brandon got extremely hot while he was at work. Okay, so he starts telling people he essentially is overheating. He is not feeling well at all. He complains to the coworkers about this, and he actually proceeds to pass out. He hit his head on the way down as he hit the ground. And that's a pretty big fall, because I think he was right at around 6 feet tall. So, falling straight down, hits his head. He came to quickly, though, and he went back to work. But it happened again about an hour or so later. So coworkers obviously were very concerned for his health and his safety, and they call EMS again. So EMS is called. He's transported to the hospital again. He was conscious this time, though, so he was able to articulate to them how he was feeling. He told the hospital staff that he had severe abdominal pain with nausea and vomiting. Okay, so keep all these little things in mind that I'm telling you that's going on with him, okay? After some conversation, the doctor was considering that Brandon had potentially eaten some outdated meat. So I'm not sure if they talked about his diet habits prior and what had been going on. They're trying to figure out what in the world is causing all this stuff. Okay. So again, blood work was completed, and again, nothing was found. So remember this, no drugs were found in his system. Brandon was discharged one more time with no answers. So 2 months later, again, so this is becoming kind of cyclical, okay? So we had February, April, and now it's June. Brandon was sent home from work due to being, quote, jittery. This is what his boss will say. So he goes to the hospital. He said he had fatigue. He was just generally weak, and he was overheating again. So a lot of the similar symptoms that he had had a couple of months prior. So he now is becoming nauseated. He starts vomiting again, and that abdominal pain returned that he had prior. More blood test, an EKG, again, nothing. Now, at this point, to be fair, if I'm Brandon, I'm getting second, third, fourth opinions. Like, This isn't okay. But he kind of just keeps going about his life, goes back to work. I mean, I guess no news is good news to him, and that's that. So later that summer in August, so this is again 2 months later, Brandon was sent on a work trip up to Detroit. Okay. So he came back home to North Carolina on September 6th. And as soon as he got back, he was immediately fired from his job. So this was interesting. The hotel staff at the hotel he was put up at for his, by his work, had come in to clean or whatever, and saw that his hotel room was in complete disarray. Clothes everywhere, trash, food, drawers, just a mess. A new unused slow cooker. I don't know why that's always mentioned in the accounts, but whatever. Maybe he wanted a good meal while he was there. But I guess hotel staff contacts his employer or whatever, and essentially it's like, we don't want to go in there to clean. And, so when he comes back, his boss fires him because of this. So let's see where we be at. So they say that they found, I'm crazy. There were also some medication vials and syringes in the pictures. That's what the boss saw. So he immediately thinks what? Drugs, right? Yeah. And so he immediately thinks that there's drugs going on. And he had already had some weird medical history with Brandon. And I think sounds like he had already been assuming some things like this. So what his boss did not know, though, is that Brandon had previously been diagnosed with low testosterone. And because of that, he was on prescribed testosterone. Okay. So if you're unfamiliar, that just means that he would have the vials of testosterone. So this is an injectable medication. So it would be quite normal for him to have syringes with him when he travels or at home, because he's giving himself these injections of testosterone. So again, this is not uncommon, but his employer assumed that Brandon was taking illegal drugs. So after he was fired, Brandon left to go stay at his parents' house to dog sit while his mom went out of town. She will say that he was in good spirits at that time. He actually wasn't too upset about being fired from his job. And she said that he told him he'd already reached out to a recruiter to be looking for new employment. So it sounded like he was in good spirits. There are accounts, though, later where when she goes back to talk about it, she was concerned. Did y'all take a sip? I think that's the drinking game, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Whenever he sneezes. So she does say later that she was worried about his emotional status after being fired. But she said initially coming to her house that weekend that he was in good spirits. And again, he's coming to dog sit. So Brandon's mom, Sarah, was actually going to be driving to Kentucky to pick up his sister, Rachel, who had been out of town. So the next day was a Saturday, and it was Brandon's birthday, and Sarah spoke with him that day. So while she's out of town, she calls him. They speak. She wishes him a happy birthday. Sarah and Rachel get home around 8 or so that evening, but Brandon had already left for the night. He had originally had plans to meet a girl, but at some point he texted his dad to say that she had canceled and that had fallen through. Okay? So now we're getting the real weird is about to kick in. Over the next 2 or 3 days, Brandon and his mom text back and forth, but this stops on September 10th. She called and texted him multiple times that day, never got a response. And by September 12th, Sarah and Rachel, his sister, right, had gotten concerned. So they drive over to Brandon's apartment. Now, keep in mind, Brandon's very close with his family. So his mom had been he was actually set to leave that apartment and move out. He was going to be moving elsewhere. And so within town. And so he had already given his notice to the apartment, and his mom had been there the week prior helping him pack boxes and do these kinds of things. So the apartment was already a bit in disarray just due to moving. But that's good to know, because later on what we find out is that, mom would have a good baseline of what his apartment's supposed to look like. She had just been there. So on September 12th, like I said, Sarah and Rachel, his mom and sister, drive over to his apartment. So when they get there, they immediately see his truck parked outside. They knock on the door. It was locked. No one came to the door. Finally, she calls the Asheboro Police Department to do welfare check. She's getting really concerned at this point. So police eventually have to, get with the property manager, all these things. They get the key, they go in so that they're not busting down this door erroneously. They walk into his apartment at 3:20 a.m. Oh, no, excuse me, p.m. 3:20 p.m. They go in on September 12th, and immediately they notice how messy the apartment is. Okay, so I'm going to read to you the officer's supplement on their initial entry to Brandon's apartment. That's going to give you the best idea of what was going on there. So let's see here. Forgive me for not being able to see things up close or far away, evidently. All right, so we have Officer Henson and Kivett. Okay, so Officer Henson and Kivett enter the apartment. Again, this is the actual officer's supplement to his report. Officers observed that the apartment was very cluttered and disorganized. Officers heard the sound of running water coming from the back bedroom. Officers approached the back bedroom and observed Mr. Embry lying on the floor near the bedroom door. He was naked and unconscious. Officers observed Mr. Embry was covered in what appeared to be bruises and lacerations about his body. Mr. Embry appeared to have several severe bruising and lacerations about his head. Officers observed a large pool of blood under Mr. Embry's head, and Mr. Embry appeared to be bleeding from his head. Officers observed that Mr. Embry had dried blood on his face and on his hands. Officers observed that Mr. Embry appeared to have small lacerations on both of his wrists. Officers checked Mr. Embry for vitals, and Mr. Embry had a pulse but was cold to the touch. Mr. Embry was drifting in and out of consciousness and was moaning and gasping as officers attended to Mr. Embry. Officers observed that the bedrooms appeared to be wrecked. Officers observed bloodstains and blood spatter on the bed, pillows, and the walls above the bed. While I am reading this to you, I'm going to show you a little bit of what they see. So here's Brandon's bedroom. Okay. So this is where they mention seeing blood spatter on the walls. I think that you can see here, if you look behind that, what looks like a stand, like a nightstand or a dresser, excuse me, there's some on the walls there. There's going to be more. I'll show you. The bed, Things were turned over and on the windowsill. Bloodstains were also observed on the wall above where Mr. Embry was laying and on the sliding closet doors that were dislodged and laying beside Mr. Embry. Officers observed in the bathroom the water running in the tub. So they get there, guys, okay? Kind of rewind a little bit. He's lying naked on the floor by his bedroom. He's covered in blood. There's blood spatter everywhere. Furniture is turned over. Things are disorganized, and they hear running water. So they go to the tub, and water has overflowed from the tub. In fact, you will hear later that where Brandon was lying, not only was there fresh blood from him, there was also diluted blood that had been pooled because the water had run out. There was water all over the floor. Okay. Officers observed in the bathroom the water running in the tub. The toilet tank lid was busted. So the heavy ceramic lid had been taken off, busted, and the toilet appeared to be pulled from the wall and was leaking. So the toilet itself is pulled away from the wall and leaking, contributing to more water. Officers also observed the mirror in the bathroom was broken. Officers observed several hypodermic needles laying about bedroom and bathroom. Remember why he has those, but they don't know this right now, right? They're supposed to eventually learn this, and let's hope that that's what happens. Officers observed several hypodermic needles and also condoms and several sex toys laying on the floor of the bedroom and in the bathroom. EMS and fire arrived on scene and began providing care. And this is where, that Brandon is transported to the hospital. So I'm going to show you a couple more. We have a nightstand here. You can see for those that are just listening, there's a nightstand with drawers open. There's multiple pieces of just odds and ends, trash. There's a broom, anything that you can imagine would be in a nightstand or in a bathroom on the floor there. Here's the bathroom. This is the toilet we were referencing. So if you notice, the seat is actually off of the toilet bowl. The tank lid is off. It is busted in half. It's hard to see there in the in this picture. There would be normally a towel rack above that toilet, but you can only see like the two anchors that the pole of the rack would go in. It's not there. Here's the busted mirror in the bathroom. We have this overturned dresser. We have this wall. Do you see the blood on this wall? Now, when I put these pictures up on Instagram, on Andrea Up Late, you'll be able to see these a little closer. You'll be able to zoom in. If you were to see this photo, I'm no spatter expert by any means, but that's certainly spatter. Like, that's not like you, I don't know, you have a cut and it's bleeding on the wall because you're standing there or something. There's like a pattern to what's on the wall here. Would you say so, Brian Sanders?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have his bed. Let's take a look at that bed. Okay. Do you see on the wall, we have blood on the wall beside the bed, and this mattress on first pass just looks filthy, but then you realize actually this is blood all on the side of the mattress, on top of the mattress. So there's that. I will show you pictures of Brandon and his injuries here in a moment. Okay. So that's what we have in terms of the officer's initial report. So after Brandon was taken to the hospital, officers obtained search warrants and continued on scene. Okay. Because you can imagine that scene does not look anything natural took place there. So while searching Brandon's truck, they found a briefcase that was locked. They forced it open and they found inside a suppressor. And there was actually a victim's rights paper from the state of Washington. Do you want to tell what that would be?
Yeah, it sounds like just from the description, it's domestic violence victims' rights or a form that departments use that actually tells the victim some of the services that they provide in their area, or what some of the local statutes are and how they read. For the state of North Carolina, there's actually a domestic violence assault that would read you as in the officer shall make a physical arrest. Okay. This is in Washington State. I don't know that we have a whole lot about that domestic violence history, but the fact that it sounds like that form was filled out to him.
Sounds like he had some history with something. Yes.
Yeah.
We will learn that his Brandon did not date a lot growing up. And as he got to be a young man and barely into his 30s, he was having a couple of long-term relationships. Neither one ended really well, and both of those women kind of were like clear red flags. And so we don't have a big history about whatever happened with the Washington State relationship. It doesn't pertain to what's happening currently with his case in the sense like where we're at now with the case. But just good to know that maybe his choice in women or, ability to kind of read those signs was a little bit not the best. So he's taken to the hospital. Like I said, the officers obtained that search warrant. So now they're just kind of checking out the inside of the home. They do see at this point inside the home, like I touched on a minute ago in the officer supplement, there was a basket in Brandon's closet, and it contained a lot of sex toys, which is to include, keep in mind, some bondage restraints and multiple other items. So that's good to know about. I don't even think that we talked about that when we talked about the case earlier. So I'm going to give you a quick timeline to catch you up to the events kind of as they've occurred at this point, okay? So on September 7th, that was Brandon's 33rd birthday, and the last phone call he had with his mom, she called him, remember, when he was pet sitting for her. She told him happy birthday. That was the last time, actually, his mom ever spoke with him. On September 8th, Brandon ordered a Domino's pizza, which he signed for, and his mom has confirmed the handwriting appears to be that of Brandon's. Because you got to think, nobody has seen him. Once he left her home that Saturday on his birthday on the 7th, we don't know of any people that he knows, any of his acquaintances that have seen him. So on September 9th, Brandon texts his mom complaining of feeling sick and having a headache. On September 10th at 6:30 in the morning is the last text he sends to his mother, and that's when we don't have the context of that text, okay? But he texted her at 6:30 in the morning on September 10th. Then later on that same day, at around 11:30 in the morning, a purchase was made using Brandon's card at the adult store Adam and Eve, okay? Staff confirmed that he was a regular there, but they couldn't confirm if he was actually there that day. They didn't have any CCTV. And then we have on September 10th at 8:30 p.m., this was the last outgoing contact on Brandon's phone. So remember, it was September 12th that his mom and sister went to his apartment and they did the welfare check and found Brandon in that state on the 12th. On the 10th, and if you remember, that's also when his mom started feeling funny about not talking to him. This was the last outgoing contact on his phone, and it was a call made to a woman in Virginia who evidently Brandon was talking to at this time, named Olivia. We won't really get much into her. He did talk to her quite often, but she doesn't really necessarily play a big part in the rest of this story. And then we just have multiple calls made to his phone on the 11th and 12th. And finally, FedEx attempted to make a delivery at his apartment on the 11th, and no one came to the door. And then on the 12th, his body was discovered. Okay, so that kind of catches you up to where we're at and what's been going on. So Brandon was transferred to a different hospital. So he gets to the original hospital. They realize his acuity is too high. It means he's too sick for them. So he needs to go to a hospital that can provide a higher level of care. Finally, on September 13th, Brandon was pronounced dead. They actually made the decision to remove life support. He didn't have brain activity. So that happened. So he's officially deemed deceased on September 13th. Okay, so we are going to take a look at his injuries. I'm going to read to you just kind of a head-to-toe list of what we're dealing with when we look at these injuries. Okay, maybe. And there were a lot of them. So when he was brought to the emergency room, there was blood all over his face. How about I let you guys see? Oh, it's going to be blurry and bloody. Well, okay. How about I show you this one? There you go. Okay. I want you to sit there with that picture for a minute while I read to you some things and be thinking about what goes on later in the investigation and what the medical examiner says, okay? So the blood had seemed to come from his nostrils and from a wound on his eyebrow. The blood had dripped down on both sides of his face and his forehead. It was dried. It was solid. It was crackled. In fact, the police officers will say that it was dried when they got there on his face. When they found him, his head had been lying in that pool of blood. The face wound, the one on his eyebrow, was kind of Y-shaped. They did say it was fairly deep. Like it would probably require some stitches. There were other cuts that were small to the bridge of his nose, to his right eyebrow. His forehead had a ton of scratches. His lips were bruised. And the frenulum, so that's that part of your, like between your lip and your gum, the part that kind of holds your top lip to your gum, right? I just had to like touch it. Mm-hmm. That was either cut or torn, but it had been busted. Beneath his chin was another cut. Then in terms of his head, there was discoloration around his eyes, kind of like a black eye, but it was very swollen. So it's called periorbital ecchymosis. And that quite literally means around the eye bruising. So this can be indicative, y'all, of obviously being punched in the face, but also different head injuries and traumas can do this. Also a broken nose can do this. Both of his eyes looked like this. We also have damage to his torso. Let's see here. His back and sides had a number of scratches. So look, I'm going to show you his back. What I'm about to show you on the left is just the photo, like the normal photo. And on the right, it'll look very startling, but it's just where his mom has kind of lightened and darkened areas to show more clearly, to specify what his back actually looks like. So you can see all of that's blurry too, but I'll put the clear pictures on Instagram. You'll get the idea. But on the left, you can see what appear to be red marks and bruises and scratches. And when you actually kind of develop that picture differently, you can see much more clearly the types of scratches that we're dealing with here. I think I also have a picture. This was the area of the floor where Brandon was found lying. So this would have been right under his head. And then here's a picture where his mom has circled. It's very difficult to see on here, but when you look closely, if you were able to kind of part his hair away from those circles, you could see red marks where his head had a lot of injuries to it. Okay. So let's see here. Where were we? So, okay. So he had the right side above his ear was a very large bruise that could indicate a skull fracture. We don't know, just based on initial findings, right? So then on his torso, we have his back and his sides had a number of scratches, most of them no more than an inch or two long, but just many, many of them. Something that and not to sway you, but that could be a fingernail type scratch. It was kind of reminiscent of that, says his mother. Okay, so the top of his right shoulder had a scratch that was about 1.5 inches long, but it was completely semicircular. And in the words of the detective on the case, quote, Brandon had contusions on his back, which were consistent with being struck with a hard object such as a metal rod or a baseball bat. So that is what the detective says his kind of opinion is of the injuries on Brandon's back. His flanks had quite a bit of bruising. His left lung was bruised, as discovered by the autopsy later on. And there was a corresponding bruise on his back. So his back had to have been hit so hard that it bruised his lung. Okay, please keep that in mind. So if you go onto his arms, the back of his left arm had several deep scratches. They were kind of side by side. These were all 8 inches long or so. These are scratches that would have bled. Okay. His left wrist had a small puncture wound. The palm of his hand had yet another. These are what later some of the officers will say they thought looked like defensive wounds. There was surface skin that was torn away from the middle of his left thumb. His right wrist had a jagged cut. The right palm had a large diagonal cut. We have a few different ones that would be wounds that would need to be treated in terms of at least just a few stitches, those kinds of things. And that's not to mention the blunt force trauma wounds. Okay. His ankles had bruising. The top of his left foot had bruising. He was bruised quite literally from head to toe. So I'm not even going to keep telling you about the bruising. Just know that picture that I showed you, I'll put that one back up of him in the hospital bed, is fairly indicative of what you're going to have there. And it's hard to tell there because he's got like his body hair on his torso. But when you are to see these pictures a little bit more up close, you'll be able to see like striping patterns lines of bruises along his arms and his sides and his chest and his back. One of the hospital staff, actually a few of the staff members of the hospital there in Asheboro, said that to his family that it looked like someone who had been hit by a car. You've got to think they've seen these types of injuries before. They said it looked like he'd been hit and tumbled by a car. That's the impression they got. Some of the medical staff actually did tell the detectives that the wounds could not have been self-inflicted, which some of them kind of had, I can't quite gather why, but some had come to that conclusion initially that potentially some of these were self-inflicted. So that's an idea of what Brandon looked like and what his injuries were. So do you have any initial thoughts yet?
Well, when you talk about like self-inflicted, they may have been saying it's possible to do and I'm not saying that he did, but it may be that they were saying like self-inflicted, like hitting yourself in the face. But now how are you going to cause some of the bruising to certain parts of the body, maybe?
Yeah, in the back.
Yeah.
Well, and yes, and if the initial officers only saw the face bleeding,
the bruising across what looked like bruising across the chest. Also, I mean, obviously we're not in a room, but if we could see it closer to see if it's like, because you did mention potentially bondage or binding. If it's anything that would cause bruising from that.
So there are, and we will talk about it, but on his wrist, where I mentioned that there had been some lacerations to the inside of his wrist, there had been questioned by some of the people, could this have been from some of the bondage? And we know, like we said, that was some of the evidence of what he had in his closet. At one point, the medical examiner said that wouldn't be consistent with that type of like a rope or a string. But we'll see what you think about that, because that may go in one ear and out the other either when you hear some of the other things that she did say. So now we're going to go through, and I'll do it as quickly as possible, some of the autopsy results. And this is where we're going to get a bit of a more clear picture to a degree. Okay. So you heard what was going on externally with Brandon, but let's talk about the rest. So he had, like I said, numerous cuts to his face, including that deep Y shape to his eyebrow. He had cuts and bruises to the inside and outside of his lips. His head injury was determined by discoloration around his eyes, that periorbital ecchymosis that I told you about, okay? That's often evidence of a fracture of the skull. Doesn't have to be, but that can happen. Again, there were several bruises and patches of swelling around his head. His head, his mom will say, was super lumpy and bumpy and swollen. So the one that I said, the bruising to the lungs, which one officer, quote, remember, said that it was consistent with being struck with a hard object, such as a metal rod or a baseball bat. He had several deep scratches. Let's see here. I'm trying to get to the actual. Okay. Let's see here. So later when pressed, the medical examiner's name is Dr. Scott. Okay. So she says, the officer, contacts the Dr. Scott and she referencing the autopsy of Brandon, So it says that this is going to be an officer's statement. So when I talk in first person, it's the officer talking about the conversation with the medical examiner. So it says, I learned from this report that the cause of death was classified as natural. It states that it is unclear what the participating event was that caused the decedent, Mr. EMBRY, superficial injuries, and were not contributory to death. The manner of death is classified as natural. Did y'all see that room? Did you see that body? Dr. Scott contacted this detective and advised she had emailed an appendix of the final autopsy report. From that report, it states that the cause of death is classified as undetermined. So at first it was classified as natural, and then it's classified as undetermined. Upon further discussion of the case, after the autopsy report that had been finalized, it was postulated that the decedent's hypoxia and organ damage may have been precipitated by substance ingestion on September 10th that had metabolized by September 12th and was no longer in the decedent's system at the time the blood sample. This grammar is really bad on here, so I'm trying to kind of get through this. At the time the blood sample underwent toxicological testing, and it says was drawn. So what they're saying is, this is a very hypothetical, and I understand you can kind of spitball a little bit. There's wiggle room for that in the medical examiner's report.
Mm-hmm.
I can assume this or presume this based off of what I'm seeing. But this kind of comes back to like a vague picture of, it is possible that Brandon had ingested something on September 10th, and by September 12th, it had fully metabolized, meaning it wouldn't be in his body anymore. So that by the time he gets to the hospital, when they do the blood test, they can't find it. So she's kind of going off of what isn't there, but with no indication that that's what would be there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, we have no indication that he ingested anything at this time. Okay. So they're saying that if ingestion was the cause of death, this is why it's undetermined, as it is still a possibility that a natural process like cardiac arrhythmia or pneumonia. So that's when she first starts to say pneumonia. You're going to start hearing her say pneumonia in these reports, and say that I think that that none of his wounds, none of what you actually see on his body were fatal, is what she says. I've not seen one test done, like a scan on his head. I've not seen, the only time you start hearing about that being done is when he was not regaining consciousness. So they do the test to check for any brain activity prior to removing life support. Outside of that, I'm not seeing any reports on his condition of his brain, like what that would have looked like, what his skull fractures could have been. So she says, the medical examiner, I reviewed the case and I'm unable to prove a criminal offense occurred. That's not her job though, right?
Yeah, that's worded kind of weird. You said that's from the ME's report, right?
Yes. And so Brian and I discussed this earlier because this took place in North Carolina. So by states, things can be a little different in terms of policy or protocol. But so she goes on to say, the apartment was secured and there were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a robbery. Mr. Embry's wallet, several electronic and several uncashed paychecks were located. So this is what excuse me, I got that wrong. This is what the detective is saying in reference to talking to Dr. Scott. Okay. So I spoke again with Dr. Scott about the injuries that were on Mr. Embry's body, and no signs of foul play was detected. This case is closed. So we're going to talk about who wrote that report and what that might even look like. So another thing that I want you to consider is that when she talks about pneumonia, I was looking at this earlier, actually, and getting kind of a little giddy about it, but she talks about pneumonia, and Brandon had not complained other than saying he had a headache a couple of days prior to his mom of being ill. There was no indication that he had a bronchitis or anything that would then set in to be pneumonia. So when she wants to say, when you look at these pictures, that his cause of death was potentially due to arrhythmias and organ failure secondary to pneumonia, there is something called idiopathic pneumonia. All that means is spontaneous. Okay. But it means that it wouldn't have been bacterial. It wouldn't be something that medication takes care of like that, because it's not an infection. Okay. So if he had, in this medical examiner later on, when pressed, not at the time, but later on when pressed, said, it could have been idiopathic pneumonia. Well, that changes everything, because now there's a reason he would have that. What caused that? One thing that can cause that is traumatic brain injury. And that would be because if your brain has been rocked, right? You get your bell rung like that so bad, the way that we know Brandon likely did, with his, his eyes were swollen shut and black. His head had lumps and bumps and cuts and bruises all over it. That's going to cause decreased lung function, right? He's not going to be breathing deeply. The police said that he was gasping when they got there, but blood was dried on his face. So he had likely been in that state for a little while. That can cause increased congestion in the lungs. He's not going to be able to cough properly or do these things that we all do when our bodies work properly and our brain is working properly. That can cause that pneumonia. So I'm not trying to geek out on the medical stuff, but just know that that's a big deal, because when she initially states it could be pneumonia that he died from and it was a natural cause of death, that's not the way. This wasn't that kind of pneumonia. This is a very different thing. Okay. So keep all of that in mind. Let's see here. Okay. So just know that. So now we've got the medical examiner saying this stuff. A few months later, the lead detective on the case was promoted. Okay. So that was Detective Suddeth. So he's the one that I originally read that officer's report from. He was promoted, so now he's off the case. And so someone named Lori Johnson, Detective Lori Johnson, had worked the case since it began. She just had not been lead on it, okay? So now she steps up to be lead on the case and takes over entirely. So we have her report on the case, and that is what I just read to you, where she's saying, I see no evidence of foul play. There was no signs of forced entry in the apartment. Robbery wasn't a motive because his money was all still there, XYZ. And she says, this case is closed, done.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, for those of you that don't know, Brian is a retired homicide lieutenant. What would you consider when you hear that in regards to something like this?
I don't know. I haven't heard.
Okay.
Like the things that I would want to hear, like even from looking at those injuries, I would want to know exactly how the injuries occurred. If someone says this was from pneumonia and that these injuries were not life-ending, the other question then, or the follow-up question will be, well, did they contribute to the death? If I've got pneumonia or any kind of illness that's causing me any kind of difficulty breathing, and I get in a fight with someone, a prolonged fight that's causing me injuries and tearing up potentially my apartment, does that fight now contribute to my death? If what you're telling me is that the injuries are considered more superficial, or we're not, damaging large organs or vital organs, okay, but could that be a contributing factor? Right. Or like I about said unearthed, but what you discovered was the TBI reference to pneumonia. I still, as an investigator, I just want to know what was going on in the apartment, and I would want to know the timeline. I'd want to know the last person that saw him and talked to him. I would want to know the status of FedEx when they got there. It said the package wasn't delivered. Okay, some people would go, yeah, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, and so I'm not saying everything they did wrong or anything like that. But also know that you can pull data from FedEx drivers. You can pull cameras.
He said no one came to the door.
No one came to the door. When you pull that footage, you may also see his known vehicle parked in that driveway, which then tells you, hey, his car's there or vehicle's there. He may have been there to narrow that timeline.
Right.
A lot of questions, but we don't have all their reports and all.
We don't. I guess I'm asking, would it be that soon after a death like this, with what you just saw, blood all over that apartment? I mean, walls, floor, ceiling, toilet broken, ripped from the wall, water running, the guy with dried blood on his face, all the things. His pillow was soaked in blood on the bed. He was on the bed. He was on the floor. He was nude. All of these things. Like, is that something that you would just consider case closed? I guess. I mean, I don't. No,
that's what I mean. Like, I would want to know every one of those details.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not bashing the police department. I'm just saying, like in other words, they may have all those answers.
Okay.
Or maybe not. Or maybe there were some things that were not looked at or investigated.
Okay. You're so diplomatic.
It's the truth.
No, you're right.
It really is. Like when we talk about
I think
this.
that's the thing. And that's what we're going to come around to as we discuss this case. Oh my goodness. So let's talk about someone now named Cassandra. Is anyone in the chat's name? So Brandon at this point was meeting women and dating from the apps, right? Hinge, Tinder, you name it. So he began seeing this woman named Cassandra in February of 2019. Do you remember what else happened in February 2019? That's the first time that he started getting inexplicably ill. His boss wanted him to be drug tested, and remember the McDonald's parking lot, and he was intubated and put on dialysis because his kidneys failed. I mean, all of these things happened, and he had no memory of that event. That's what happened in February of 2019 also. So this is when he starts seeing Cassandra. 5 days after Brandon passed away, on Wednesday, September 18th, Brandon's sister-in-law got a Facebook message. Okay. This Facebook message is from Cassandra. She introduces herself, and I'm going to tell you what she says. If I can find it. Okay. Get this. So he's just died. She, in theory, has been seeing him for about 6 months. Okay. And she contacts Michael's or Brandon's sister-in-law and says via Facebook Messenger, "Hey, I know you don't know me at all, but you're Brandon Wesley Embry's sister. And I was your brother's girlfriend from mid-May until his passing." I know she says mid-May. We're going to come back to that. "I met him in a dating app called Hinge. He sent me a text with a crying emoji on Tuesday the 10th, and I haven't heard from him since, and I've been a worried mess since then. He never told me your mom's name, but that he had a sister that was in Kentucky. I found out the hard way yesterday when I went by his apartment at Park Place in Ashboro on South Church Street yesterday evening, and some woman told me he had died. I hope you know how wonderful of a man he was, and that I thought the world of him." It goes on. There's more. She goes on to ask for one of Brandon's sweatshirts to remember him by. She also asked for some of her things that I guess had been at Brandon's apartment to be returned. Do you have any, anything on that?
That just seems like a lot of detail.
A lot of interesting details. Like his middle name.
Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, the full address.
Mm-hmm.
And then that someone in the neighborhood said
he was dead.
He was dead. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I've heard enough people say things and read enough text messages from phone extractions, whatever. Most people lead with, "I heard," fill in the blank, "is dead." Usually, if they want to add additional information, it may be, I was over at his house and this person told me.
Yeah.
That just seems very sanitized.
I hope it's okay that I reach out to you. I hope I'm not out of place here.
Yeah.
I was Brandon's girlfriend. You know, from what I understand, I think you're his sister. Is that right? Right? I just heard this and I'm so upset. Yeah,
yeah. And that's where, too, you look at more transactions or transmissions between people and you start to understand their syntax and then you kind of go, oh, okay, this is just how they talk. Or maybe they were so detailed because this is a complete introduction to someone I've never met, so I'm trying to lay the groundwork. But, yeah, it does seem like it's a little heavy on the details in general. Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm going to read you a little bit more about Cassandra. Maybe. Sorry, y'all. Okay. So, she does come on strong. She goes on to say that she and Brandon were soulmates. They were wildly in love. They were going to get married. This stuns Sarah, his mom. So eventually the sister-in-law gives this contact to his mother, and his mom is now having the contact with Cassandra. Okay? So his mom didn't even know that he was seriously dating anyone. So evidently Cassandra sends her a photo of a wedding ring from Zales on her phone with the comment, "Brandon has great taste in jewelry," and said that she had been pregnant with Brandon's child and had miscarried. She sent Brandon's mother pictures of an ultrasound. She told Brandon's mom how many children she and Brandon were planning to have. She called him pet names. She shared intimate details of their relationship with his mother. He's newly dead, okay? She explains that they were getting ready to open a joint banking account together and that she should be entitled to the money that was in his account. She winds up talking. Sarah talks to everyone in her family and Brandon's family, asking if they knew anything about this woman. This woman who evidently was supposed to have been pregnant with his child. They were, planning a life together. They're going to get married and have more children. No one did. No one had heard of her at all. So Brandon's sister, Rachel, did remember that Brandon mentioned to her that he was dating a girl from Russia, okay? But that things probably weren't going to work out because she was going to be going back to Russia. So the mom, Sarah, didn't even know Cassandra's name until she comes in after Brandon dies, right? So, let me get my little notes pulled up here. So anyway, Sarah continues to communicate with Cassandra through Facebook Messenger, but then they start texting, they start exchanging phone calls. They did even have some face-to-face meetings. I believe Sarah met up with Cassandra around 4 or 5 times. So over this time, Sarah is starting to almost like develop Cassandra, if you will. So she's just like everything. When you read, I will put pictures of Cassandra and her text messages, screenshots with Sarah on Instagram, okay? But when you read these, just keep all of this stuff in mind because Sarah is starting to get information from her and be bubbly and like, oh, that's so sweet. And I think it's so cute that you guys did that. Tell me more about what Brandon said to you this day or that day, okay? And what she's doing now is taking this information and feeding it to detectives. So they start learning more and more about Cassandra. So they had already heard of Cassandra because they have these phone records from Brandon, right? So they tell Brandon's mother, Sarah, that, yeah, he corresponded with Cassandra, but there was another girl in Virginia that he spoke to much more. And the woman in Virginia is the one that he like had that last outgoing phone call to. But again, that's that Olivia, and that doesn't really have a lot to do here. But it does imply that maybe he and Cassandra weren't as serious as she seems to be saying that they were. Okay. So let me make sure I get you here. Oh, my stars. What's happening here? Okay. All right. So Cassandra. Oh, y'all. Okay. We're getting weirder again. Mm-hmm. This one keeps going. Mm-hmm. So Cassandra was later found to have lied about multiple things, including telling Brandon that she was Russian. So remember his sister said that back in February, Brandon told her he was seeing someone from Russia. Okay. So in that initial Facebook message to his sister-in-law, she says that they met each other in mid-May, right? She's kind of covering herself. Like, I didn't know him back in February, maybe when he started getting sick. Her parents and grandparents are all from Maine, by the way. She has no Russian lineage there. She lied about having multiple sclerosis. She lied about OCD, an eating disorder, a master's degree in nursing. She lied about having a twin sister who had passed away. These have all been proven to be false. It was later discovered that Sandra actually was married at the time of her relationship with Brandon to a man named Danny. Oh, you guys wait till you hear from Danny. They lived together in South Carolina. They were in Darlington, South Carolina, okay? So Danny says that the marriage was actually pretty good until she started going away for long periods of time in 2019. This is likely, right, when she started seeing Brandon. So Danny informs Brandon's mom, Sarah, that when he looks back, he believed that he was being poisoned by Cassandra. Sometime around 2016, when he first started seeing her, he began feeling nauseated, weak, and fatigued at various times. And this continued into 2019. He also stated that his health began to improve once he left Cassandra. Then another ex-partner of Cassandra's also informs Brandon's mom that he too believes he could have been poisoned by Cassandra during their relationship. Now, again, these men didn't say this at the beginning because they don't know that there are other people that potentially this is happening to. They don't want to sound crazy. They just leave her. So it is what it is, right? So it does not appear that either Danny or this ex-boyfriend ever reported these suspicions, but Brandon's health issues began in February 2019, the same time he evidently started this relationship with Cassandra. So it gets, like, we don't have all night tonight. If we were doing 2 or 3-parter, we could, but to the point that it goes on and on with Cassandra and with the lying. It gets pretty crazy. So we're going to talk now about Danny. Okay. So the man that she was married to, evidently while she was starting to see Brandon. So Danny tells Sarah, Brandon's mother, all about their marriage, all about his history of illness when he was with Cassandra. And so he actually sent some photos to Sarah of him on a hike, but his color was off. So he was kind of jaundiced. He recalled that he was so weak he could barely complete that hike. He had symptoms of exhaustion and fatigue at the time. He said that he was one to do most of the cleaning around the house, and that Cassandra would make all these messes, and he would be so exhausted from work, he'd come home and go straight to bed, and notice that when she left, he would feel better. So as Danny starts to learn more about Brandon and the circumstances around his death, right, his life starts to make more sense. Now he's putting pieces of the puzzle together for himself. He realizes that whatever happened to Brandon is very likely what was beginning to happen to him. He told Sarah about his morning time routine. So he would always get up really early, make a pot of coffee, walk to the bathroom. As soon as he would close the door and start the water for the shower, he'd hear Cassandra get up and walk to the kitchen. He said he could hear her footsteps all through the house. She was kind of heavy-footed, okay? So even over the water of the shower. So he said that every morning, so he gets out of the shower, he'd poke his head into her room, and she would be pretending to be asleep. She never told him what she was up to. He says, but when I look back, things kind of start to make sense. And that's when he thinks maybe she was poisoning his coffee. And he would take 2 large thermoses of coffee to work and would then feel nauseated, weak, and fatigued a lot of the day. Okay. You got anything you want to talk about yet?
Well, that's one of the big clues, we would say.
Yep.
I mean, you start to get into the realm of lying, fake identities, traveling, and then history potentially of her with someone who was getting poisoned.
Right.
Potentially getting poisoned.
Right.
Or at least
mirroring the same symptoms that Brandon was having leading up to his death.
Yes.
So we actually have a text in January of 2018. Danny sent a text so it's not just this man's coming out as some weird copycat victim saying, oh, I was married to her and I felt funny too. We have old texts of his that he sent her. And in 2018, he sent 2016, Danny sent his wife a text that said, I'm just so run down. I feel like it's not like being tired. It's like my body's getting weak. Okay. So then Kevin is Cassandra's ex-boyfriend that she had for 3 years. He starts talking about their relationship and how his current wife at that time read some of Brandon's mom's writing on Brandon's death. And then he was like, whoa, that sounds familiar. So he said that one time, this is an ex-boyfriend of Cassandra's. One time she passed a cigarette to him that had some sort of powder on it, and he refused it and got a fresh pack. He said when they were on the way to the store, she told him how she would sometimes like to dip her cigarettes in bleach and smoke them to get high off of them. So he says after he got a fresh pack, she refused to smoke any from the pack she had offered. She didn't smoke any more from the pack that she had offered him earlier, right? So he also recalled another incident where Cassandra passed him a vitamin water. It had already been opened, and after he drank it, he got very badly sick. He had very severe nausea and vomiting. From that point forward, he said he would never drink a bottle that had already been opened. And again, just to reiterate, but Brandon's health issues began. He had never had these incidences until February of 2019, and we know that was the month that he met Cassandra. Let's see here. I think I've got just a teeny bit more on that. And I won't bore you with too much of this anymore, and we'll kind of start shooting back and forth on this. But Cassandra told Danny a ton of lies. As we know, she's already told Sarah and other people. I've given you already kind of a list. She told Danny before she married him that she'd given birth to twin boys before she met him, and that they had died when they were quite young. She sent him a photo of 2 boys that were between 10 and 11 years old. She also said in one of her text conversations with Danny, so we actually have this as evidence, right? It's not just something he's saying. She said, quote, I feel like I'm legit dying. I just got home. I almost passed out at work. I saw stars. My legs collapsed in the office. Massive stiff neck. Hands are shaking like I have Parkinson's. And I feel like I met Floyd Mayweather in an alley and he took me out. I feel like I'm dying. Oh, and I broke 3 plates with food on them when my legs collapsed this morning around 10:30 a.m. It started Monday at 7 p.m. If it doesn't stop, I'm going to go to the emergency room. And evidently Danny's response to this, y'all, was, what do you want for dinner? He had become so accustomed to her exaggeration and her lies that he actually just started ignoring her fully. Then Kevin, her ex-boyfriend, kind of says the same thing about her pattern of lying. She would tell him that her uncle was in the mafia. She told him she was previously married to a cop. She would tell him that she was going to go to Staten Island with her family. Anyway, she also told Kevin that she was pregnant multiple times. And when questioned about her growth or lack thereof, she would say it was a cryptic pregnancy. I mean, this goes on and on, y'all. So this lady, at the very least, is cuckoo and potentially a murderer. I said potentially.
Yeah, just mean that you got to talk to someone like that, and a lot. It can't. I may be getting ahead of you, but it can't be a simple pass. Hey, let's talk for a minute or two, and then that's it. Like, it's got to be very in depth,
right?
And the more information you know, obviously, the better the interview will be, because then you'll either know, hey, this person could be directly related to this death, or we can absolutely prove this person was not, in fact, in the crime scene, didn't contribute, that sort of thing.
Right. So get this, y'all. This is what I would consider kind of the smoking gun in this case. So evidently there was a recurring theme when she had correspondence with Danny, her husband, and it was sleeping pills. So she would ask for bottles of sleep aids from Walmart. Sometimes this was multiple times a week. So I don't know about you and your home, but usually you buy a bottle of sleeping pills. It's going to last a while. So this could be sometimes, like I said, multiple times per week. So as Danny was cleaning out his place after she left, he found capsules that were squeezed out and empty. And these were similar to capsules found in Brandon's apartment when it was cleaned up. Now, what I haven't told you yet is that Brandon's toxicology, while it always came back clean and free of illicit substances or anything like that, it did come back positive for very high levels of diphenhydramine. If you aren't aware, that is the active ingredient in Benadryl.
Okay.
So if you go to the store and get generic Benadryl, it's just called diphenhydramine. And do that. It's cheaper. And it's the same thing. But so this is Brandon's toxicology revealed increased levels, or any levels would be increased levels. Yeah. It's not natural in your body, but really high levels of diphenhydramine. Let's just call it Benadryl for ease of that. And that is the sleep aid, right? We know it's for allergies, but people use it to sleep. And we know that she had asked her husband to buy multiple bottles of sleep aid. And the capsules were similar to that he found at his home squeezed out, were similar to what was found at the scene where Brandon died a natural death, evidently. Cassandra said that Brandon would also take sleeping pills that she used. And evidently she suggests to Brandon's mother that he could have just died by suicide using sleeping pills.
Oh. Did she know of the injuries?
We'll talk about it.
Yes, ma'am.
Inside Brandon's bedroom, there was a bottle of the exact brand, Equate, the Walmart brand, right, of sleeping pills. This is the same brand that Cassandra requested that Danny pick up for her. And this bottle was on the floor of his bedroom near his body. And also on the floor were some of those pills. So let me show you. I believe I have a photo. Yep. So this is a text thread between Danny and Cassandra. Notice she's listed as wife in his phone, right? And so he had said, what's the name of your sleeping pills? And she shows him a photo. That picture is the Equate brand, the Walmart brand of the sleeping pills. And she talks all about them. And that's just kind of a otherwise nondescript conversation between the two of them. But that's further evidence that he's not just saying things like, this is what it is. And it matches what we had at the scene where Brandon was found and ultimately died. Oh, my stars. Isn't it crazy?
Yes.
Okay, so let me tell you a couple more crazy things before we go back and forth on what this looks like. We're going to go back to the PC, right? The probable cause affidavit initially written by the detective that was initially the lead on the case. That detective, what is it?
Sudith? Maybe?
Yeah, Sudith. So initially, you've got to get probable cause, right? You can't just get the search warrant. So he's articulating why they need a search warrant. And this would have been immediately upon Brandon being discovered, his body being discovered, and being transported to the hospital. So he writes, this Detective Sudith writes, after the initial search warrant on the apartment was executed, detectives learned the extent of Mr. Embry's injuries are life-threatening and may have not been self-inflicted. Mr. Embry's injuries include what appear to be defensive wounds to his right palm, several contusions to his head, with one large contusion to the right side above his ear. Mr. Embry also has contusions on his back, which are consistent with being struck with a hard object such as a metal rod or a baseball bat. And Mr. Embry's nose appears to be broken due to it leaning to its right side. Several medical professionals stated to this detective that these wounds could not be self-inflicted. Upon receiving an update from Moses Cone on Mr. Embry's condition on September 13th, this detective learned that Mr. Embry's body temperature had dropped, his pupils are fixed and dilated, and his organs are shutting down. The keys and wallet belonging to Brandon Embry were not located inside the apartment. The door to his apartment can only be locked from the outside with the key. Listen to me, guys. It can only be locked from the outside with the key or from the inside without the key, and Mr. Embry was found in such a position that he could not have locked the door the way the door was actually locked, okay? Leading detectives to believe that the door was locked by another person after Mr. Embry was injured. In an effort to locate Mr. Embry's door key, which could contain fingerprints or DNA evidence to show who locked the door, this detective believes probable cause exists for a search of Mr. Embry's vehicle. They explain what the vehicle is. The truck was found unlocked and parked directly in front of Mr. Embry's apartment. And this, again, is where Detective Sudith is presenting probable cause to get the search warrant for both the apartment and then for the vehicle. But he states that this is inconsistent with self-inflicted wounds and that they do not believe, based on the way that door was locked, that Brandon could have locked his own door. And they could not find the key. Let me tell you something. They've never found the key. So the apartment key, Brandon's apartment key, is the one thing that's never, ever been found. Everything else there exists, his safe, money, all these things, but his apartment key never found. His sister will corroborate that his apartment key was always on the same ring as his truck key. His truck key was found in the middle of the floor at his apartment, but it was not containing the apartment key. He even had an extra apartment key, like his little spare that would normally be outside under the mat. His mom knew about it. His sister knew about it. They'd used it. It had actually been missing since February, the first time he got ill and went to the hospital. Okay. That's big. Also, the detective stated in that PC that the truck was unlocked. That could be neither here nor there, but just keep in mind, his mom will say his truck was always locked. His truck was never unlocked. That would be like if I went out to your car and it was unlocked, that would be not the norm. That would be really weird. So this really will be the last thing that I read to you. I feel like it's story time with Andrea up late, but I'm going to read to you now what that Detective Sudith surmised when he interviewed Cassandra. So like you said, this is someone who needs to be talked to, right? Like they need to talk to her a lot. Well, he did talk to her. Here's the problem though. Detective Sudith eventually gets this promotion, and so he's off the case. So he's actually doing a lot of good work, a lot of strong footwork, a lot of follow-up with some of these leads. He gets this promotion, and that's when that Lori Johnson, Detective Johnson, takes over, and then pretty quickly things are considered done. Okay, she's the one who says, I find no evidence of foul play. This investigation is closed. When we just read everything he said was quite the opposite. Okay, so here he is. Either way, Detective Sudith talking about and talking to Cassandra, the Maybe Poisoner. Maybe Poisoned is a good band name.
There's already Poison.
That's the cover band.
Maybe Poison.
Yeah, Maybe Poisoned. All right. So Detective Sudith says on September 18th, 2019. So this would have been 5 days after Brandon died. 6 days, right? Yeah, 6 days after he was found. This is when he sent the search warrant to AT&T for these records. So he says, I received Mr. Embry's telephone records through the search warrant, and I learned from these that Mr. Embry frequently called. Now, this is redacted in his report. We find out that what he's talking about, that the name redacted is Cassandra's name, okay? He frequently called Cassandra. This is a Colorado Springs number at the time. I called this number and spoke with a female who identified herself as Cassandra from Darlington, South Carolina. When I asked Sarah, Brandon's mother, about Brandon's girlfriend, she told me she didn't think Brandon had a girlfriend. Remember, this is before Cassandra reached out to Brandon's family. However, a lady had contacted her, or I guess at the same time, on the internet, claiming to be Brandon's girlfriend. Sarah had said that Cassandra had contacted her shortly after Brandon's death, and the two of them had been talking frequently on the phone and texting back and forth about Brandon. Sarah was surprised to learn that Brandon had a girlfriend and found it odd that Brandon had never spoken of her, especially if the two had been dating since April and were talking of marriage. This is the third different month that we hear they'd been talking to each other since. By speaking with Sarah about Cassandra, I concluded that, and these names are redacted, but it's two different female names. One of them is Cassandra. One of them is a different name. And he says, by talking with her, I concluded that these two were the same person. Okay. Sarah pointed out a lot of statements that Cassandra had made to her that she felt to be untrue, such as her place of employment, her job title. The rest of this is redacted. One of the statements that Cassandra made to Sarah was about how she had surprised Brandon one day. Oof, y'all listen up. Surprised Brandon one day after work and was waiting on him inside his apartment when he got off work. Claimed that Brandon had hidden a key outside of his apartment just for her to use when he wasn't there. Let's see here. Let me make this little note real quick. Mm-hmm. Sorry for the dead space. Just about that. Okay. All right. So she said that she would sometimes surprise, that one day she surprised Brandon. This is just interesting conversation to have with the mother of the guy that just died. You know, and one day I surprised him by being in his apartment when he got home, and he had this key that he made specially just for me. Remember, these keys are missing. Okay, and it doesn't look like Brandon could have locked that door. So Detective Sudith goes on to say, I ran a criminal history on Cassandra and found nothing but traffic violations. However, evidently she had told Sarah that she'd been arrested several times. Why are you going to say that? I was unable to locate any arrest on Cassandra. I was able to run her telephone number and learned that it was registered to and he gives this name that is redacted. Ultimately, what we're finding out here is that he's learning that 2 or 3 different women that have been referenced are actually all Cassandra. Okay, so she's full on Looney Tunes. Okay, so on November 15th, 2019, I called Cassandra and asked her if she could come to Asheboro. You guys listen up and speak with me about Brandon's death. She was very hesitant to agree to come to Asheboro and asked me several times if she was in trouble. I assured her I was trying to figure out what had happened to Brandon and why he had died. She finally agreed to come talk to me, and we set up an appointment for November 19th. The day before, on November 18th, I received a message from Sarah saying that Cassandra said she was not going to be talking with me. Sarah said that Cassandra was scared to talk to me because she felt like I knew something about Brandon's death that would get her in trouble. I mean, why would you feel that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Evidently, Cassandra then does call Detective Sudith and says that she can't make it because she has food poisoning.
Oh, okay.
Do you have any red flags from that?
Yeah, that's the biggest one.
Why is she going food poisoning?
Yeah.
Why is that on her brain?
Mm-hmm.
So eventually they reschedule. She does come in and speak with him ultimately, okay? So on December 4th, she comes to the Asheboro Police Department to speak with Detective Sudith about Brandon's death. He says, I spoke with her for approximately 2 hours. The interview was audio and video recorded, and during the interview, she told me that she was still legally married and lived with her husband. She told me that she had been seeing Brandon and had come to Asheboro about 3 or 4 times to visit him, and that she loved Brandon and he loved her. She showed me texts on her phone between she and Brandon talking about their feelings. When I asked her where she was when Brandon had been assaulted, she said she was home in bed. I asked her how she knew this happened at night, and she could not answer. Is that another one?
Mm-hmm.
Ding. We need like a bell noise for all the flags.
That's actually good. Yeah.
Ding.
We'll do that.
Okay. She asked me where Brandon was. She asked me where Brandon was found, and I told her in his apartment. She asked me to elaborate on where in the apartment, and I told her I could not divulge that information because it is still an open case. I asked her about speaking with Sarah and the stories that she told her. Cassandra admitted that she'd been lying to Sarah about a lot of things, and she stated that she would go on and tell Sarah this herself. I asked when the last time it was that she came to Ashboro, and she said on Brandon's birthday. She then told me that she came to Ashboro about a week after Brandon had died because she had not heard from him, and stated that she called the police department and was told that Brandon died. I could not find any record of this call. Remember, she told Brandon's sister-in-law that someone at his apartment complex told her that he had died. I asked Cassandra if she would consent to a dump of her phone to show that she was not in Ashboro during the time of Brandon's death. So they're just talking about hooking it up to this computer and extracting this information, right?
Yep.
So he explains to her. He says, "I explained to her that we would have to go to the sheriff's office to get the phone dump, and she agreed to do so." I stepped out of the interview room to consult with the sheriff's office to see if the dump could be done today. I observed Cassandra on camera when I left the interview room. She took her phone out and began to type or do something on her phone very fast. Cassandra followed me to the sheriff's office in her vehicle. During the drive, I observed her holding her phone to the steering wheel as we drove, as though she were texting or working on her phone. Upon arrival to the sheriff's office, Cassandra performed the phone dump using software. This is all redacted. After all the data was extracted, Cassandra left. Get this, guys. Upon reviewing the data extracted from Cassandra's phone, I was unable to get any recent GPS location data. I was also unable to see any text messages at all. Cassandra stated, it's all redacted, so this would be the person that performed the extraction. Said that the extraction was complete. It was a complete extraction, and that the computer had extracted everything on the phone. He stated that if there was no GPS location or any text messages found, it was because that data was erased prior to the phone being hooked up to the computer. I had just observed the text message a few minutes before we traveled to the sheriff's office between she and Brandon. That's what she was showing him. And concluded that Cassandra must have been erasing data when I observed her using her phone in the interview room. And basically, he goes on to send a request to Verizon for her phone records. Mm-hmm. And they realized that essentially at that time, she had performed a factory reset on her phone. So he had none of that information. Is that another would we ding right there?
Yeah, because basically your phone can be used to exonerate you.
Yeah.
In an investigation.
Why wouldn't she want to prove she was?
Right. Mm-hmm. Or it can help assist with the investigation where,
right.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that all happened. She factory resets that phone. I mean, man, I feel like we're talking more. If you're curious, though, remember, she said she was at home in bed when Brandon was assaulted. The great point to be made here is what Detective Sudit said was, how do you know this occurred at night? He never said that. He just said, where were you when Brandon was assaulted? I was at home in bed. All right, cool. How do you know it was at night? She never answered that question. In case, let's say she was at home in bed. Let's say her husband's at home and, he's a heavy sleeper. He's got all that Benadryl in his system after all, I guess. Uh-huh. And she wants to leave the bed. If, in fact, that's what happened. Could she feasibly make it from where she lives at her home in Darlington with her husband to where Brandon lived in Ashboro, North Carolina? Well, the distance there is about 108 miles or just under 2 hours. Mm-hmm. So incredibly feasible that she could be going back and forth like that, okay? So remember that response from the medical examiner. remember what she said about the pneumonia and the natural causes. And at first it was a natural death, then it was like an undetermined death, all this stuff. Evidently, Detective Johnson made an interesting choice. So this is the detective that took over, I will say, unfortunately, after Sudith, because he'd been really working this. Sounds like around that time that he had the interview with Cassandra and the whole factory reset on her phone. It wasn't long after that his promotion took place and he was off the case, and that's when Johnson got on the case. So evidently, Detective Johnson made an interesting choice, and that would be, while the death was still listed as undetermined, so we don't know how this man died or what contributed or caused his death, right? At that time, this was in March 9th of 2020, so 6 months after he dies, Detective Johnson ordered all of his remaining evidence from the case to be destroyed 6 months after his death. Is that anything that's normal to you? Based on what we know about this case?
Not on my experience. And I don't work in that department. I don't know what their policies are. But normally, when you do what people refer to as an evidence purge, or yearly, usually, you will fill out forms as an investigator. You get with a DA or a prosecutor that has worked previous cases that you have evidence still logged in.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's convictions, if their charges were dropped, there's certain criteria, then you can purge evidence if it falls under certain categories. It sounds like at 6 months, that seems very premature, but potentially under their policies and that sort of thing, if they are looking at this case and saying, this is not a homicide or suicide, this is a natural death, then potentially it sounds like they just went ahead and got it signed to destroy the evidence, right? Or return it to next of kin. It does seem premature, but I would assume that's why, because it fell under that category.
Right. It feels like a big move. I feel like it feels like a big move.
I also don't know, like we were talking about earlier, when cases get handed off. So it sounds like the lead, Sudith, gets promoted to sergeant and goes to a different assignment. If he had been still working like actively when he gets promoted, then he may sit down with an incoming detective and say, hey, I've been working this case. These are my findings up to now. This is what I was going to follow up on. Boom, 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 boom. But I got promoted, so I can't. Here's everything. And the detective hands it over. If the case had been exhausted and everything had been worked, and then the next detective comes in and reviews it and says basically, okay, there's nothing else done, then usually that's when it stays like an unsolved case.
Right.
It sounds like when she, which is Johnson, comes in, I don't know, I may have missed something, why everything seemed to switch to, hey, this is all just natural. There's no more follow-up with Cassandra or whatever, who also does things that are almost consistent with people when they're guilty of something. They start wiping phones. They start deleting things. When really what it sounds like is her phone actually would have shown the detectives.
Right.
Yeah, of course I'm in South Carolina. Check my phone, look at it. It's common knowledge about pings or locating phones and that sort of thing. They can still pull tower extractions during that investigation and may be able to triangulate her phone potentially. If some things were done at that time. I don't know whether they were or not. But.
She has still never been listed as a suspect in the case that we know of. We know that, things go on behind the scenes that we're not privy to, which is fine. But the last thing that we have is that the case is closed. And we've talked about that. That doesn't mean they can't come back to rework it or anything, but it was listed as closed in the sense that it doesn't sound like they are actively working it now. I don't know.
That's one. I mean, that's when you have to be able to explain all of that.
Well, and I would like to hear Johnson explain why she, just like you said, but
Right.
Why aren't you talking to her? Why aren't you following up? Why aren't we have most of this information because of Sarah, so Brandon's mother. She has been in long, like at length contact with Danny, who was Cassandra's wife. I think they're finally divorced. It took a long time in North Carolina. There has to be a year separation before divorce can take place. And so at the time that this was a couple years ago that these reports were made, but he was awaiting divorce at that time. So they should be divorced now. But, I mean, if they have information and know, the detectives, about Kevin, I'm going to be talking to Kevin, her ex-boyfriend, about Danny, her husband. If, draw up these similarities, talk to someone about what, whatever consistent poisoning with Benadryl would look like as far as symptoms are concerned. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like with everything, all these investigations, whether it's a larceny of chewing gum or a homicide, they're almost always the exact same. You just keep asking questions. You keep working leads. You usually get a lot more resources when it's a homicide, right? So Ashboro's got about 8 detectives assigned to their CID. So if they're working it as a team and everybody's kind of dividing stuff up, there should be resources to be able to do a lot of that stuff. If in fact that's what they were doing, was having to travel. South Carolina's not that far away. You go down, do some interviews, do some things. I don't know.
Well, I would think if they average between 1 and 3 murders a year, I think is what you were looking at earlier.
Yeah.
They obviously don't have a ton of experience. It's not a large department. I understand that. I would think that if anything, that would cause them to be alarmist. That would cause them to walk into this apartment and see the scene that was before them and be even more likely to consider it to be.
Which sounds like it sounds like your lead detective, Sudith, was doing just that. And there were some comments in the chats about, hey, do we have to establish PC when someone's beaten and that sort of thing? It's like, yeah, with search warrants, you do. You always got to have probable cause. And I just from skimming it, that search warrant.
And they didn't have any trouble getting it.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. It seems like that investigation, they were doing a great job of documenting those things. I'm just curious, at what point did all of that get explained away, of the injuries, the fact the key's still missing, the fact that if you have a key unaccounted for, that means someone can get in and out of a location very easily and not leave signs of forced entry and that sort of thing. And people can get in and out of houses without showing forced entry.
Particularly when you have the decedent's key.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. Like
that you reference when people tell. We talk about like blurts or tells. Like people, at every turn when speaking with Brandon's mother would say things that also allude. So we even have. Let's see if I have it in here. This is a conversation where Danny, Cassandra's husband, is talking to Brandon's mother, Sarah, on a text thread, and she had asked him to. About his symptoms. She's just trying to find information about her son, right?
Yeah.
So he had written her and said, "Hey, I just remember, sorry so early, but my stay in the day hospital for dehydration, my kidneys had shut down, or they were very close to shutting down. The doc told me that's because, and that told me that later he checked for damage. There's some typos there, but he's saying, the doctor told me that later he did check for kidney damage." And so then Sarah, Brandon's mom, says, "That is more than dehydration. I'm going to make a full list of symptoms." And he said, "Sorry, I didn't want to forget." And she said, "Quite all right. This is all very important." And that's when they kind of form this little bond that he wants to keep talking to her because he's remembering now things about his past, about his medical history in regards to Cassandra. So we also have, y'all, there's a reason this is kind of you can look more into this case, but I mean, there's 2-3 part shows and writings and articles on this because it does get wazoo. Cassandra has multiple text threads with Brandon where she goes from being Cassandra to then pretending to be, what was the last one we read? Anastasia, who was supposed to be, this is a false person, a made up person. She pretends to be a woman named Anastasia, who is Cassandra's friend, who is using Cassandra's phone to text Brandon to say that Cassandra is in the hospital. And the symptoms she gives, it was like she was lying on her bathroom floor. She was nude. She was very sick when I found her. I don't know what's wrong with her. Maybe something with her stomach. She had vomit around her and blood. Everything was wet. She basically is describing the scene of what then becomes Brandon's death scene, basically, to Brandon as a fake friend of Cassandra's. If you kept up with that, cheers. But and she talks to the mom about the key specifically. Well, the key is the one thing missing. You know what I mean? So like all the things she talks about are in reference to what ultimately happens to Brandon.
Yeah, that's meaning, like if I'm sitting in a briefing, it just seems like all of a sudden the investigation shifts when a new investigator comes in. But at least at this point, if this is the briefing, I don't know why that shift was, other than if an ME says this appears to be pneumonia. That was my question earlier, was, okay, I understand that, but also could a fight,
well, and it's like I said before,
could poisoning contribute? Could someone be poisoned and toxicology come back and it be this?
Yeah, and you know, ultimately every death is caused by heart death or brain death, you know, like, so brain death or cardiac death is going to be technically the cause of death of everyone, obviously. But we know that ME was pressed later during the investigation about the pneumonia. And I say pressed, it was really just kind of asked again. And she said then, well, it could be idiopathic pneumonia, like a spontaneous pneumonia that can be second. It's not a bacterial infection. It's not something that requires antibiotics. It can be secondary to multiple things. Some of those things being traumatic brain injury. And he had that. So all of that would be contributing factors and corroborate the idea of foul play, or that the beating, death, you know, then made these natural body things happen to die.
Which then that question goes back to who did the beating?
Yeah. Well, there was a metal rod, the shower curtain rod, that had blood on it. And if you remember in the original PC affidavit for a search warrant, Detective Sudith said he has striping or linear bruising to his sides and his back to indicate that they would be hit with a metal rod or baseball bat. And we have a metal rod with blood on it. That was actually, I think, partially bent. He had a bruise on his left lung. So internally he was bruised from, you know, that matched the area of ecchymosis or bruising on his back. So it hit so hard it did that. I'm not saying that she did that, but I'm saying that if the idea that we're going down is that she did the poisoning, I think that she was fully well able. He would have been incapacitated to a degree. We don't know how incapacitated he was before the beating, but if he's on that much Benadryl, right?
Yeah. The toilet with the lid off, I believe, and the tub running and overflowing. So same thing like when we're looking at crime scene photos and we're going, okay, well, how does that happen? What does that look like? He
could have stumbled out of the bathtub and grabbed the toilet tank and knocked it over as he stumbles to the floor.
Right. That's what I was going to say. It's like during, yeah. Well, I mean, we often read each other's thoughts, but yeah, during the fight, that can happen. All of that can happen. Especially like with you fall into the side of the tub area and turn that water on during the fight, during the struggle, you know, and it's completely collateral damage.
Yeah. It's not that he was necessarily preparing a bath.
Right. That's also one where we always talk about, you have to kind of recreate, how do these things happen, or how could they happen? How could something physically happen this way? Why did the bed look like there were no sheets? There was no bedding, but then there what looked or appeared to be bloodstains on the mattress. So the sheets
weren't found. As far as I know, the bedding was not found. The pillow was there. The pillow was covered in blood. Another interesting point on that wall, y'all, there was, like I said, there was spatter at different places of the wall. There were places where you could see it was smeared, probably from just like physical, like as potentially during a struggle, right? Not like a cleanup indication, but just like that. But then there was some streaking pattern in the blood that Brandon's mother thought looked like cloth. It looked like something with like ribs. She didn't know that initially, but that had been on the wall. So she goes home and she, after some time thinking about it, starts to perform these tests on her own. And she makes up like she gets online and finds kind of like a recipe for like something consistent with the, blood. Okay. So a liquid with that consistency. She puts it on the wall. She makes it red. She does it all. And she noticed that with Brandon was nude when he was found, but he always wore like a white rib tank top, okay, under his shirts as an undershirt. So she took one of those and smeared it against the wall, and it wound up being identical to the pattern of what was on the wall. We also know that there had been an open container of bleach that was spilled out in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
It had actually kind of crystallized, which it can do over time. There was Drano that was open and poured out, like spilled out as well. Nothing else looks like it was incredibly cleaned or wiped. We don't really know. They did use Blue Star, which is kind of like luminol, to test some other areas. But there was blood everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. So I don't know. People do weird things to themselves. I get it. People can be like, like the whole like masochist. We know he had some bondage and some handcuffs and things like that. And like all the sex toys, like whatever, but he didn't have anything or any history or like you've said before, video or anything to indicate none of this stuff. He's got blows to the back of his head from something metal, very likely.
Right. Yeah.
Or that toilet tank. I don't, whatever.
Yes. So like that, like any kind of behavior that people do that could contribute to their death, as an investigator, you have to be able to document or articulate. You can't just speculate and say, like you just said, like that. Like, okay, if he's into bondage or bonding or whatever, like, is there video documentation? Well, we got items in the closet. Does he have footage from a phone extraction or computer extraction that would show that he's doing anything that could end his life? Autoerotic asphyxiation would be a perfect example.
Exactly.
If someone is either researching it on their phone, they've got pictures of it, films of whatever, and then they do that, and then they slip, the knot gets too tight, the bindings, whatever, and then they choke themselves out or strangulate, then you can say, okay, we understand this happened because of this evidence. There's a pattern of this behavior from previous incidents, or police reports documenting any kind of self-induced injuries. If 1 month before this happened, police responded out there because he was beating himself and putting his own head through a wall or doing whatever, then yeah, you can argue that.
Yeah, we don't have any history of that whatsoever.
Yeah.
But the one thing I didn't touch on, y'all, I mean, I mentioned it once, but a consistent theme, and it's come from Detective Johnson's mouth this whole time, the one that took over the case, was that he was a drug user. Because she said he had synthetic, marijuana, and she saw syringes. So again, the syringes were from the testosterone he was taking. Absolutely zero toxicology tests have shown any illicit drugs in his system. And we have a lot of proof of that because he had been hospitalized 3 times prior to his death, right? So we have no indication that he was using drugs whatsoever. But when she got there, she said, this is what she considered it to be. This is almost to me as out in left field as the idea of pneumonia as a death, or this being called a natural death. But Detective Johnson said that on scene, when they originally got to scene and found Brandon lying there in that state, and they start looking around, he gets transported out to the hospital, and she says, oh, it's probably just like a meth thing, like a meth rage. Like he was under some psychosis with meth, and whatever. And when pressed about it, about the smear on the wall, and she'd said, he probably was trying to kind of wipe it up or whatever. And I think, and the mom has always said, obviously, like, number one, he didn't do meth. Number two, if you're in such a state, such a psychosis with that, are you going to have the mental, capacity to turn around and try to clean up after yourself during the fit? So none of that makes sense. But when she said that, that's what landed, I feel like, in her brain. I feel like she said it, and that's what we're going to go with, is that it's drugs, and that's what he did, and we're done. Even though she had the case, she had the jacket, she had the info from the previous detective who had all this information on Cassandra. Yeah. And later the mom who's providing information as she speaks with Cassandra's husband.
Again, you brought up a good point. I don't think we talked about it earlier today, but the syringes, and assuming right off the bat, oh, this is heroin. where it appears to be testosterone for injections.
Right.
That's
easily testable.
Right. And it also is one of those things where investigators or officers get on the scene and they see it and they go, I've been to 10 different overdoses this month. Asheboro and that whole area is riddled with overdoses. So it can be very easy for initial pass to be like, this is heroin involved, overdose, probably fentanyl, whatever. But you got all those injuries and the scene itself. That's when all the questions
we have come upon multiple people like you and your job, and then us just around town.
Yeah, just driving around.
Overdosing.
Oh, yeah.
And
oh, yeah.
They may go crazy once, or they may fall and bust a lip and bleed or a head and have an injury or two from that as they pass out. Mm-hmm. We do not have the scene that we saw at Brandon's home. All of those walls. I mean, it transferred through his whole, it was his entire apartment was full. Let me see if I put the kitchen counter picture up. I might not have. But again, I mean, his head, it's just it's hard to see on here, y'all, but these are multiple lumps, bumps, bruises all over his entire head. That blood there, a busted mirror.
Oh, yeah, go back to that mirror if you can, please. What does that look like to you, that kind of break?
I think it could look like it's from that shower curtain rod or whatever
from
hit his
bar
back.
Almost,
or something linear.
Hitting it, and causing it to break cleanly like that. Not like it's getting hit on the point or by an object being
like something swung.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Also, is there a drawer right there in the middle of the bathroom?
There is. Yeah. I can't see that. But that's also from, if you look at the other vantage point of this photo, like one of the overturned, there was like one, like some piece of furniture where a drawer was pulled out. Another one was completely overturned.
Yeah.
Might be that actually from that. See that top drawer is missing.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, and there may be some supplements or some follow-ups that's missing from, what you can recover online, but I don't know.
The closet door is off its hinges and lying there, as you see there. So when you look at this picture, if you look in the foreground a little bit, the front right area, there's like a small plastic black fan. Mm-hmm. Just to the left of that on the floor, you see a little bit of red, and that would be this spot right here. So if that gives you an idea of how he was lying. So there's that picture again. This would have been, I can't point. This would have been bathroom back behind there with that light on.
Yeah.
And that's how his head was lying, turned to the side. There's an alcohol swab package right there.
Yeah.
That he would use for his testosterone injections.
Okay. I also want to say, I think in the comments, maybe it was Michael Hendricks. I was trying to explain. I don't do too well trying to type and listen and talk, but one of the things that we always do is try to find the last documentation of a room like that or any kind of crime scene. Jeez. Are there photos taken that were posted on social media recently? Are there pictures in a phone extraction? Is there a person, the victimology, a person that is a family member or a spouse or whatever, best friend, that can kind of explain what the rooms in the house should look like? A house can be messy, but that doesn't always mean items are going to be broken and thrown on the ground or discarded. The way you see that, you see what could be a fight. You've got blood on the walls. You've got doors broken off of hinges. You've got a toilet seat that looks like it's broken off and on the floor. Things like that, because someone may be able to explain, or you see a phone extraction and go, well, less than a day ago, he took a photo inside of his room, and his room is a little disheveled, but this stuff is not all broken and busted.
Well, and that's what his mom said.
Right.
So I had mentioned earlier, mom can corroborate these things because she had come over just days prior to help him move. And that's why in one of the pictures you may see, I'm not sure if I put it up here or not, but there were moving boxes everywhere. Oh, so this one, I hope I showed this. Yes. Okay. So this picture, when you look closely at this, there is, so the back right of the picture is a box standing on end, and it's actually a closet organizer. And everything inside it is new and in cellophane. You can tell it's a brand new, it was a new box.
Yeah.
Hasn't been opened, whatever. It's still kind of sealed around the sides. But it's been torn down, and there's blood on the inside of that, like almost like as in a struggle. Yes. Exactly what you just did. Like if someone grabs and pulls, that's what it looks like. And you see blood on the inside of that cardboard, and then down there on that paper on the floor as well. I just don't, I mean, yeah. Mom was like, yeah, it was kind of a mess in here. This is not what it was. There's a picture of the kitchen that shows every single cabinet door is open. Drawers are pulled open. Like it, not like all that happened in the struggle, but if she did what we think she did, it sounds like she was doing all that stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. And we don't have to get into it, obviously, but things can be staged too, or someone do follow up and go, oh, I'm going to open up certain cabinets and do certain things. I mean, looking at that scene looks like there's a struggle. And if you say everything is self-induced, I'm just saying, like, usually if you say that, you got to have something to back it up, some kind of history, something.
Well,
so you don't just assume that and then go, all right, well, we're done.
That's what happened. Or like Cassandra said to the mom when she offers, well, maybe he killed himself by overdosing on sleeping pills.
Again, the burning question for her should be, why would he commit suicide? Why would she even volunteer?
And why are you talking to us about sleeping pills?
And exactly.
Well, like,
right. Oh, yeah.
We know she has that history, of getting those. Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, you guys leave some comments on here on the YouTube episode.
I think this is one, too, if people are listening on Spotify or Apple or those other platforms, this is probably an episode that is a lot easier to watch on YouTube. Because then when you start looking at those crime scene photos and the injuries while we're talking, it's a lot easier to follow. In that sense of, I like that you had the photos, that we had access to that.
Well, this one needed that for sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's horrible. I mean, either way, nobody wants to think about a person passing away, even if you think it's self-induced, whatever, that something going on in a room like that. But yeah.
Ugh. Anyway, well, I'm washing my hands of it for tonight. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But we appreciate y'all hanging in late. This is actual Andrea up late tonight.
That's why you got the name.
It's late.
Right. And we could even say now, like as we're talking and we joke about it, phone conversations and our talks go until sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning. It's not unheard of.
We're not now.
No.
Oh, no, we're not on the phone till 3.
Oh, no, not on the phone, but we'll sit up and talk.
Oh, yeah, that's
until
true.
Sometimes 2 or 3. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
So,
Billy Bean.
But you did a lot of prep for this.
I just choked on my spit.
Yeah.
Well, there's just a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Good grief, excuse me.
I did get a text from Change Gang.
Oh, okay.
Who was on earlier, and he's trying to multitask. But he said we were rocking 2 great tans.
Oh, nice.
So I had to explain to him that
summertime.
We're always it's summertime and we're at the beach. And I did send him a photo from the wedding, the one.
Oh, did you?
Where we're standing together. That one photo.
You keep talking.
Yeah.
I'll give a sneak look. This is why you don't want to see my stuff. I'm gonna show you this while he's talking. Give you a little I don't know, a thank you for listening tonight. I'm gonna show you something that I'm not showing everybody else right now.
Also, there was a comment earlier about the way we look like the Brady Bunch, kind of the way our format is.
That has to be Michael Hendricks, because that's what he always says.
Yeah. And I apologize, Michael Hendricks. Like I said, I can't type and talk and do things, but I did tell people, like, hey, if you send a picture like that looks similar to what we look like in the format,
Oh, okay.
we can create a Brady Bunch from the solid followers. You know what I mean? The people that are tuning in. And
that would be
cutting
fun.
Up with. I think that would be pretty cool.
Can I do this one?
Yes, most definitely. Yeah.
Oh, hang on. You keep talking.
And Silly just made a comment that she sat up and talked with us late before, and we do.
She has.
We FaceTime before.
Mm-hmm. And Davey, hey Dave, like, and also thank you. There were a few people who absolutely were not. We were not asking and thinking it would happen, but a few people contributed to the registry, which was like incredibly cool and not expected. We can talk about that too. We had some of our podcast friends come out.
Yes.
Are people? I still don't even have it pulled up. Are people still even on here?
Yeah, people are still on.
Yeah, we had so Beth and Greg from the Bars Open with Beth and Greg podcast. Flew out from Texas, hung out for the weekend, came to the house and partied.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
No. I would say it was cool to actually meet them in person too. I know.
We had a lot. I'll have to put some pictures up.
But it was just that idea of when people, the running joke or the cliche is like, "Oh, I got a podcast," but it allows us to just meet people either through social media or through the podcast, and then talk, and you kind of like just share the same kind of, I don't know, love of life and hanging out and experiencing things. And when they came out, I think that was one of the things which Greg had been out here before. I think this is the first time Beth had been out in this area and fell in love with it and just talked about how great the area was, just how cool it was, and which it is. It's an incredible place. So I was glad.
Oh, that's going to echo, isn't it?
It's going to echo.
I'm trying to do something. If you give me 3 seconds.
No. I'm good.
Also, who else came? Jen?
Yes. So I don't know if I would just say on YouTube, Imperial Girl, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I get mixed up, but like I know who she is, but Imperial Girl, you'll see in the chats a lot, came up to the wedding as well and hung out, and that was great.
I'm trying to make it stop. Also, we had, oh gosh. Okay.
Wait a minute. Hold up. Michael Hendricks, I need to tone down the niceness.
What?
It makes him uncomfortable.
Oh, he's being silly, I'm sure.
Yeah. Y'all gotta be nice.
I didn't realize that I still had that picture up. Or did I just do that?
No, I think you just pulled that up.
Oh, geez, Louise.
No, like all jokes aside, everybody's gotta be nice to one another.
Of course.
That doesn't mean you can't get mean when someone needs it or handle business.
Why isn't it showing?
That.
Is it showing?
It is. No, I'm seeing it.
Are y'all seeing this?
I have a picture up on my screen. Y'all let me know.
And then...
you see it. Okay.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. And then Drew from Com Center was going to come out. He's out carousing around on the West Coast, I believe, right now. And then who else? Oh, Ski. Yeah, Ski from formerly the Disruptors podcast with BC and Ski. Yeah. Ski came out with his fam. We had a good old time. Yeah. Let's see. We got one more. I'll show you. I'll put that one up there. I have to kind of brag on it a little bit.
Silly said I was hella lucky, and I have to agree with her.
Oh,
like 100%. We say it all the time, and I know how lucky I am and fortunate. So
I don't know how to do this.
Maybe that's why I'm so nice, because I'm happy. I want everybody to be nice.
Silly, you got an open invitation, sis.
Yes.
Well, enough. He's not bald. His hair's cut short.
Yeah.
He wears his hat so his glasses stay.
Yeah. If y'all noticed earlier tonight, they dropped, like they locked in. And when they do that, oftentimes I end up getting
that glare.
That. And so it can be annoying if I'm looking at the camera, then all you see are like weird halos around my eyes.
Y'all are funny. Yeah, well, that's it. I think that it's time to work on next week's show.
Yes, I believe so.
Do you have any news?
No. Didn't we have an idea for trivia or something? Did we talk about that?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. I thought we had an idea to do like trivia with everybody.
Maybe like 3 weeks ago or something.
Like we asked questions.
We talked about it.
And
yes,
they
we
have
did
a
talk about
chance
that.
to respond. Maybe we're talking about doing that on Instagram live. Maybe. I don't know. We talk about a lot of great ideas.
All right. Well, y'all need to go to bed.
Yeah.
And we do too.
Yeah.
But y'all, thanks again. We love y'all and we appreciate you and all your support and all your love. And just keep tuning in. Try to, if you remember to, hit the subscribes and the likes and all that stupid stuff. Write comments, write whatever. It helps. Thanks y'all in the chats. I saw Cupcakes and Cameo. She changed her name.
Do you know who else busted up in those? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, I'm saying there were a couple of new ones. Who do you? I know who you got your eyes on.
Who?
Gray, Mr. Gray Man.
Yeah, Mr. Gray. He popped up in there.
Yeah, we'll have to make him a regular.
Regular
chatter.
Yes.
But we really enjoy you guys and we love talking to you. So thanks for being patient while we took a couple of weeks off. But it was needed and it was great. And now we're back and ready to rock and roll. So I think we're all ready now, re-energized, right?
Yes.
All right. I don't still have a picture of it. Okay.
Nope.
All right. Were you good? You have any final say your piece? Y'all good?
I'm good.
All righty. Well, thanks guys again. And I guess until next Tuesday, next week. We will see y'all next Tuesday. Been a minute since I did that. Good night, y'all.
Wait, it's still going, baby.
Why, how's it still going?
It says 2 is counting.
Why is this always the case? Hey, y'all. Bye, y'all.